From the title of this video alone, you can pretty much infer what it is going to be about. A couple days ago, I was sent a script for an old version of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie dated March 2022. Now, I can't actually, send the entire script itself, but I will be showcasing the differences it has to the final film alongside some snippets of the script here and there. Before I start, however, you may be wondering how the hell I got my hands on this. To start off, I am obsessed with Five Nights at Freddy's, and by that I mean I am passionately obsessed with this franchise. And for the past year or so, I've gained a platform on Twitter because of my enthusiasm regarding it. Pretty much, if you don't know something about the franchise and you ask me, I will probably know about it. The point is, I've gained this platform that's given me kind of like a pedestal to talk about my thoughts about the fandom, but also been this source of information for people. And because of that, I leave my DMs open. However, back in September of 2023, I got an interesting DM. I got a DM from someone who claimed to have inside information about the upcoming Five Nights at Freddy's film. And immediately off the bat, I was curious, very curious. So I talked to them more and I got to know them better. So they told me their role in production, which I'm not going to give out for obvious reasons, and so on and so forth. They, over time, would give me little droplets of information. And these droplets of information all eventually ended up becoming true. And the closer we got to release, I kind of became their messenger to clarify up misconceptions or overall misinformation that was going on in the community. And then about a week prior before the film came out, they told me something very interesting. They told me they had an early draft of the Five Nights at Freddy's film, and that despite what director Emma Tommy said, the script in particular was rated R. So skip to present day, they decide to give me the script now that the film is out, and I get to show you guys stuff that was in it. So that's the story of how I got the script. Now keep in mind, not only was this script rated R, but it was from a whole year prior to filming started. Things in the script may be completely different, and some things might have just been removed to be censored. But overall, I would be very cautious what you take here as canon. In fact, I wouldn't take any of it as canon at all, unless novelization comes out or an extended cut ends up reiterating these things. That being said, I apologize for the long intro, but let's go ahead and get started. So the intro is pretty much the same. The main difference is that instead of Foxy being mentioned to be the one chasing the guard, it is actually referred to as a dark mass. So whoever was chasing the guard originally was unknown. After the guard gets cornered into a dead end, the character that we do not see would have then hit him over the head with a toppled chair. It would have then cut to a visual of the guard being dragged by this unseen character with a trail of blood following him. The rest of this scene pretty much plays out the exact same way as it is in the film. However, because this was an R-rated draft, we would have seen a bit of gore. The camera would have panned to the ground before showcasing a horrific visual of the guard's disembodied eyes falling to the ground. This would have been pretty cool to see because it is kind of a reference to the original game over screen from the first game. Unfortunately, the really cool 8-bit intro scene would have not been shown, and instead it would have just cut to the title card. Instead of cutting to Mike's bedroom, we would have then gone to the mall scenes with Jeremiah. There isn't really any differences about these scenes at all, except for like one thing, but I thought it would be funny to mention this. In the film, Jeremiah says this.
Summer Ready 2, I traded a mint condition Kyle Ripken Jr. rookie for a used copy of Missile Command. That card's probably worth $800 now. I wish I could participate in that memory and actively kick my own ass.
However, in this R-rated draft, Jeremiah would have said that he would have kicked himself in the balls. So after Mike beats the dude up, it would have then cut to the beginning of the film with Michael waking up. So now we are at the scenes where we get introduced to Steve Raglan. In this version of the script, it was a lot more dumbed down than what we actually got. Unlike the final film where Steve is pretty confrontational and serious toward Mike, in this he's kind of a troll. For the majority of the scenes, he's kind of just been seen pissing Mike off and trying to get on his nerves more than actually trying to help him. And the scene with him recognizing his name wasn't in this version of the script at all. Instead, there's no implication whatsoever that he actually knows Mike personally, and the only reason why he offers, Freddy's in the first place is because he kind of just straight up gives it to him casually. And in my opinion, I think what we got was a lot more impactful and better narratively. When Mike first enters after getting the delinquency notice, it plays out the same, but there was actually some more additional dialogue with Max that we would have seen. Max first tells Mike that Abby's been in her room all night and that she's been chatting away with her imaginary friends, and also that she thinks she's getting better at drawing. During this, Mike is literally not listening whatsoever. He's kind of just paying attention to the delinquency notice that he just got. So Max comes up to him and sees the notice and mentions her dog, Bonesy. She tells Mike that he should probably get a dog that's big and mean like Bonesy because it would end up scaring away people who try to put up, delinquency notices. Mike is just still not paying attention whatsoever. And before Max leaves to head out the door, she tells Mike that Aunt Jane called and said to remind Mike to be at Dr. Lillian's office in the morning, adding to that she'll be bringing her lawyer, Doug. The next few scenes play out the same, and then we get to the part where Mike has his dream sequences. The sequence is actually literally unchanged from the final film, except for one thing. In the film, a yellow frisbee is what distracts Mike from watching his brother Garrett. However, in this draft of the film, instead of it being a frisbee, it would have been a yellow bird perched on a log that Mike would have seen through his binoculars. Upon hearing the revving engine of Afton's car, the bird would have been spooked off and flown away. The next set of changes comes from when Mike is first talking to Dr. Lillian. In the film, Mike explains that Aunt Jane doesn't actually care about Abby and simply wants to get the welfare check from the state. However, in this R-rated draft, he was going to have an extra line where he mentioned that, "I know this because it happened to me." This could imply that Mike was raised by Aunt Jane after his parents left his life. But given this was removed for some unknown reason, and everything else in the scene is pretty unchanged, I would assume it has no bearing on what's canon, unless the movie novel states otherwise. But it is still interesting to know. So next we cut to night 1, and the beginning is kind of the same, but there's extra Raglan dialogue when he's speaking over the phone, and because he was a bit of an asshat in this version of the script, he just jokes around a lot. Raglan brings up that the security system has dated back to when Ronald Reagan was president. He also, for some reason, jokes around about dying in an electricity fire, and instead of saying the iconic "I will see you on the flip side" like he does in the film, he would have just said, "You and Freddy's should be a match made in heaven." Mike enters the office, and instead of it being cleaned up, it is actually in the same state that the previous guard in the intro left it, meaning that nobody came in to clean it up. Now, the funny thing is that Kim was not named in this version of the script. Instead, she's just called Woman. When Kim is talking about the animatronics, she would have had an additional line talking about state-of-the-art animatronics and puppetry. This got removed from the final cut. You remember that spooky Balloon Boy figurine? Yeah, that's not in this script at all. Instead, when Mike opens the locker, he kind of just picks up his flashlight in his vest. The next morning, as Mike is caressing Abby's face while she sleeps, the camera was going to slowly pan toward her desk, revealing that her most recent drawings involved the 5 ghost children, as well as a drawing depicting Garrett being kidnapped. Honestly, I don't know why this got removed because it's actually really cool. Next up is the Sparky's Diner segment, and honestly, this was a lot more boring than what we got. The cameo lines with Matt Pat were not in this whatsoever, and instead of him kind of, saying his line, he would have just been shooed away by Aunt Jane. All of Doug's funny moments were not in this whatsoever. He was kind of just told to shut up by Jane, and that was it. The only interesting difference is that when Jeff talks about possibly killing Mike, he brings up that he knows a guy that could do it. Also, Max would have brought Bonesy with her when she came to come babysit Abby. So we cut to night 2, and this is actually the part where we get a lot of interesting differences. After Mike has his first encounter with the ghost children in his dream, the scenes would play out the same with him going to the breaker to reset the power. But, unlike the final film, where Foxy stands in the flashing lights in the hallway, it would have been the ghost of Garrett peering through and looking at Mike through the corridor. Mike then would have caught a glimpse of his brother's ghost, only for him to run away immediately after being spotted. Vanessa's introduction was a bit more confusing, and instead of her just saying that she went to Freddy's as a kid, she would have lied and said that she used to work at Freddy's and that she also helped design Mike's security vest. I don't know what the point of that is, and I can understandably see why this got cut, because not only would it have been a paradox given Vanessa's age, but it adds nothing to the plot at all. In fact, she just never brings this up again after night 2. Ooh, the break-in segments. So the break-in sequence has a lot of key differences. Initially, we were going to get a longer segment of Jeff briefing the gang on what they were supposed to do as they were standing outside of Freddy's. Carl was originally going to be bringing a police baton, and he was also established as being the son of Hank. Bonesy would have been in the truck, barking incessantly as Max is just sitting there with him. So it plays out the same, and they go around, trashing the pizzeria, but Carl's segment is actually very different. In fact, it's kind of comedic. Instead of Carl just knocking over pots and pans, he was going to pick up ketchup and mustard bottles and start skipping around and spraying it all over the walls in the kitchen. He would have been smearing it everywhere, just making a huge mess. That's until a splat of ketchup hits him on the back of the head, and he turns around to see Chica. Yeah, Chica was gonna squirt ketchup on Carl. He's stunned by Chica's sudden presence and becomes even more shocked when he hears the giggle of a little girl come from within Chica's suit. Appalled by the sudden string of events, he does not have enough time to react to the cupcake, which, as it does in the final film, launches at his face. Hank hears the blood-curdling screams of Carl. He rushes over to the kitchen counter and is met with the horrific sight of his son's face being chewed away by the cupcake. Instead of running away like he does in the film, however, he takes the time to avenge his son. He cries out, "My boy!" He clenches his bat with anger and darts into the kitchen to avenge his son. He wields it like a battle axe, only for Chica's inhuman strength to stop it mid-swing. She then crunches the bat inward like a soda can. Hank is horrified by the robot's capability, and in response, Chica somehow smiles. Hank backs up in horror, and Bonnie unsuspectingly creeps up behind him, and then plunges his guitar into his head like a spear, causing him to die and collapse to the ground. By the way, while editing this video, Christian Stokes, who is the actor of Hank, actually posted his audition tape for the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, and it is actually what this scene would have been. So I'm going to show it to you on screen. Jeff, upon hearing the ruckus in the kitchen, investigates, and he spots Chica and Bonnie as they both stand over the dead corpses of Hank and Carl. They turn to him and he runs. Like in the final film, he is confronted by Foxy. However, instead of cutting away, we get a brutal visual of Foxy's hook slicing into the side of his face in perfect fashion. It ends up revealing brain matter, skull, and tendons from his jaw. His body then collapses to the floor next to his bag of coins. Max's death was a lot more tragic. Instead of being spooked by the ghost child, she would have followed him with the concern and desire to help him. Upon entering parts and service, she would have called out and asked if the boy was okay. As Max stepped closer to Freddy, the machine would respond with a rumble of child's laughter from within the costume. She grabs a stool and steps up to look into the jaws of the bear, and the camera would have cut to a shot looking downward into the costume. We would have seen the little boy curled up within the animatronic. Unsuspectingly, Freddy would have moved forward, and we all know what happened next. So the following morning, after Mike puts his badge into the dresser, he would have retreated into his room like a hermit and opened up his laptop. After hearing Vanessa mention the missing children's incident the previous night, his interest has piqued. And using the internet, he searches for anything he can find about the incident. He finds an article named... Oh my god, this sucks so much. Sad Night at Freddy's. I cannot make that up. This article has a clip attached to it with a news reporter talking about the missing children's incident that night. After Mike takes Vanessa out to the river and opens up to her about his past, he would have actually given a lot more context than there was in the final film. He reveals to her that after Garrett died, his mother tried to cope by having another child. However, when she ended up having a girl instead of a boy to fill in the missing void of Garrett, she spiraled into insanity. This caused his dad to leave, and a week after that, the mom ended up killing herself. That's pretty damn dark. Night 3 happens the exact same, and we get to night 4, but with some slight changes. The interesting thing here is that when Vanessa is seen looking at the wall of drawings, it refers to the depths of her mind as the rabbit hole. The infamous fort scene is also here in the R-rated cut. So to all those people who claim that this scene was added in just to cater toward younger audiences, sorry, but it's always been here. In fact, it was actually slightly longer in this draft. Bonnie would have actually ended up giving Abby a piggyback ride. When Mike first comes up to Ella, there actually is no description of the spring locks like there was in the final film. In fact, Ella is just sitting there and her stomach hatch is closed. Now, Night 5 actually has the most differences in the entire film. In fact, the scene where Mike has the dream with Garrett and his family again plays out way differently. Instead of him meeting his family as his adult self, he would have been projected back into the dream where he relives the kidnapping of Garrett. Instead of his brother getting kidnapped and him chasing Afton's car, he would have turned around and stopped dead in his tracks at the confusing sight of his mom tickling Garrett. His mom looks up to him and says, "I told you to watch him." Young Mike approaches the table and says, "I'm sorry." Garrett looks up and speaks to Mike in a tone that is notably off. He then tells Mike to play with him and that he's been gone for so long. He thinks to himself, this isn't right whatsoever. And when he looks back up at his family, their faces are now evil and distorted. Mike yells at his family and says that they're not real. And then he hears a child's voice from behind him say, "But it could be." Behind him is the blonde boy. This time, unlike the final film, he is actually all alone. The blonde boy tells Mike that he can have this dream every night when he goes to bed. But Mike isn't buying that and says that it isn't true. The blonde boy then says, "So? The truth won't bring your brother back." The blonde boy points toward his family, but they are now gone. And suddenly time itself freezes in the forest. All the birds, all the wind, everything is in completely still motion. As Mike turns around to look at the blonde boy, the other 4 ghost children begin to emerge from the forest. The blonde boy then says that if he gives Abby to the ghost children, that Garrett will be at peace. Mike then asks the ghost children if they really do know who took Garrett, and then the blonde boy just responds if they have a deal. After Mike says yes, he asks the boy, "Who took my brother?" The blonde boy looks at him in the eyes and simply says, "I already did." The boy then extends out his hand and points at the ground. Mike turns around, and in the spot where his family used to be, there is a drawing of the yellow rabbit. Mike cries out and says that he made a mistake, and as the blonde boy is walking away, he stops and turns around just to say, "A deal is a deal." When Mike gets up to escape the torture bear and he backs up into the costumes, he would have instead backed up into one singular costume. The costume would have then opened up and out would have came Max's body. Mike then looks up and realizes that Max was not the only person in that costume. He looks up and sees that Jeff, Hank, and Carl were all put together in a costume filled with gears, saws, and blades. I'm assuming this was going to be the body of the torture bear. Next up, we have Aunt Jane's death, which, oh my god, I'm so mad this got changed, because it's actually pretty badass. So because this was rated R, Aunt Jane would have visibly been seen smoking and drinking alcohol, and while she was watching TV, the living room would have just been filled with smoke. As she sits there, the glowing blue eye of Golden Freddy would have lit up and shone through the smoke. That is... Dude, Abby comes out and it plays out the same, except for 2 interesting details. One being that Golden Freddy was actually not withered in this version of the film, other than missing one eye. The second one being that the blonde boy would have visibly been shown to separate his soul and step out from the Golden Freddy machine. However, this is seen off screen in the final film. Also, before Abby and Golden Freddy leave, we would have seen a camera pan to Jane's body lying on the floor, as a small puddle of blood would have filled the carpet. Next, we have the Vanessa Afton reveal, which plays out exactly the same. However, she never mentions Afton by name, only simply just saying, "He is my father." The photograph of young Vanessa is different as well. Instead of her standing next to her father in the yellow rabbit costume, it would have been a photograph of her standing with cleaner versions of the 4 animatronic characters, all 5 of them standing outside of the exterior of Freddy's with a banner that read "Grand Opening." The interesting thing about this is that there's actually behind the scenes photos of this exact shot being made, but it didn't end up in the final film, meaning this was cut pretty late in production. Vanessa then explains how to stop the animatronics, but a different set of dialogue from the final film is given to us. Mike asks Vanessa how many children that her father has killed. Vanessa responds with saying that she doesn't know. Mike then asks if Garrett was put into one of the machines. Vanessa then shakes her head no and says, "No, he was before." I'm not sure why this got left out of the film, because it straight up confirms that Garrett died before all the other kids. Although this is something easily inferable and guessed from the actual release of the film, it would have been nice to have definitive confirmation. Next, we have the encounter with Ella. Instead of Ella being a spring lock when Chica brought Abby to her, her chest cavity would have opened up and a small claw-like mechanism would have came out trying to grab her. Pretty much exactly how Elizabeth was killed in the games. After Abby struggles to get away and runs toward Mike, he yells at Chica and says, "Stay away from her, you bird." That's not a bit, by the way. That's something that was actually in the script. And as Abby runs away into the dining area, the Foxy kid backs up, like in the film, but there was kind of a slight mistake in the script. Instead of referring to the ghost as a boy, it referred to them as a girl. The order of scenes would have played out differently too. The scene of Vanessa rescuing Abby would have played out first, and instead of Mike being the one to tell Abby about the drawings, it would have been Vanessa. Vanessa would have then convinced Abby and told her what the yellow rabbit truly did to her friends. We cut to Mike in the dining area calling out for Abby's name and searching for her. But he stops dead in his tracks when he hears the voice of Garrett call out his name. He turns toward where the voice is coming from and sees the ghost of his little brother. Garrett is standing in the archway entry of the pizzeria. Mike is currently shocked and in disbelief, so he walks closer and asks him if it really is Garrett. Garrett does not respond and instead steps back and lets the darkness of the archway consume him. Garrett completely disappears into a void, and then this happens. Also, a notable difference about the Yellow Rabbit is that his costume is described to have whiskers and blood smeared all over him. Now, a big complaint people had about this film was how short Matthew Lillard's portrayal of Afton was. Well, in this script, it was worse, and honestly, it just makes me appreciate the final product a lot more. Afton would have picked up Mike and then thrown him into the fort that they made the night prior. The Yellow Rabbit prances toward Mike, and unlike the film, he doesn't say anything at all. And so he steps up and pulls his knife out and starts waving it around like a mad orchestrator. The script then describes that Afton's sheer evilness is powerful enough for him to telepathically communicate with the building, in which his stance is in sync with the start of a laser light show that simply turns on from him waving his knife. As the Yellow Rabbit is about to stab Mike, Vanessa interrupts him. He turns to Vanessa and speaks to her, which is, by the way, the only dialogue he has as the Yellow Rabbit in this entire screenplay. In fact, he would have never taken his mask off. "Vanessa, my dear, you know you can't hurt me. Even if you had the courage to pull that trigger, I am one of them. Your bullets are worthless." Vanessa then shoots him 4 times, which is actually a lot more sensical than how she does it in the final film. But Afton charges at her and she misses all her shots because she's shaking so badly. He then embraces Vanessa and stabs her right in the stomach. He then stares at her dead in the eyes and simply says, what a nasty little thing you have become. Abby then replaces the drawing, which is interestingly different in this as well. In this version of the script, it actually depicts all 6 of the children, including Garrett and the blonde boy, all being killed by the yellow rabbit. However, in the final film, while Garrett is still in fact in the drawings, the blonde boy is missing. All 4 of the animatronics begin to attack Afton. Foxy slashes at him, Bonnie hits him in the knee with his guitar, and Freddy pries open the yellow rabbit's mask, allowing Chica to literally drop a cupcake in his suit like a grenade. I don't know how Scott Cawthon expected that to work, but at some point he thought it would. Instead of the spring locks going off, the cupcake would have chewed through Afton's flesh as he screamed. The script then describes the building responding to Afton's pain by becoming alive and making a deep, hellish groan. We then get a cut to Mike inside his consciousness, and he is back in the forest as his younger self. But this time he is sitting across a table from Garrett, who is now eating a burger. Garrett looks up at Mike and says, "It's time to go." "I don't want to go yet," Mike says back. "It's time to go, Mike," Garrett says again, and smiles at him. "I forgive you." Mike wakes up and Abby is urging him to get up. He is fully aware of his senses now, and like in the final film, they retrieve Vanessa's body and all run out of the building. Interestingly enough, there is a shot that doesn't make it into the final film, in which it describes a ghostly wall of smoke treading closer to them as they leave the building. The screenplay then says it cuts to 3 weeks later, and the final closing scenes are pretty much the same. The first difference, however, is regarding Jane's fate, which is even more confusing than how they didn't acknowledge it at all in the final film. Lillian would have asked Mike if he heard back from Aunt yet. Lillian would have asked if Mike... I can't believe it's... Yes, Aunt. Lillian would have asked Mike if he heard back from Aunt Jane, in which he would just say, "No, I guess she just moved on to better things now," which I guess kind of implies she's still alive. I have no clue what the hell is going on. Anyway, the next difference is very specific and odd, because it has me wondering if there is some scrapped significance. Before it cuts to the ending shot in the pizzeria, Mike would have gotten up in the kitchen and stumped his toe on something. Upon lifting his foot up, he would have observed the object with confusion. Abby would have also asked what it was, to which Mike would say, "It's nothing." Mike would have put the object down and the camera pans up to it. The object being the security badge, but slightly dented and a smear of blood on it as, quote, "a menacing tone plays." Yeah, I don't know what the hell that means. Anywho, it cuts to the scene with the yellow rabbit and the blonde boy having a standoff in the supply room like in the final film. However, the yellow rabbit is just sitting there while in pain. He doesn't even bother to reach out like he does in the final film. The boy shuts the door and it pans back to Afton. We then hear the spring locks go off, and it cuts to black as we hear the echoes of him screaming. And there actually was going to be an old post-credits, but I was not given that because it supposedly has spoilers for the second film. So hopefully in the future I will be able to read it to you guys whenever the second film comes out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did. Please make sure to subscribe because I will definitely be doing more videos in the near future. By the way, do not ask me anything about the second FNAF film. That's because I literally don't know anything about it. But they did tell me that the second film is in pre-production and that they should be aiming for a 2024 to 2025 release. That's not guaranteed though. Just don't take my word for that. But it is coming and should be announced soon. Anywho, toodles.